Perhaps one of the most striking aspects about this work is part of its narrative structure, namely that Boethius introduces philosophy to us not as a discipline, not just as a subject or even an activity that he's engaged in, but as an interlocutor, as somebody who addresses him, who speaks to him, and with whom he engages in conversation, namely as a beautiful and powerful, very brilliant woman. It was quite common to represent concepts or disciplines under this sort of guise in antiquity. And so in a certain way what he's doing is he's continuing a long-standing tradition that you can find in narratives. And there's a whole story that could be told there about why men depict the various arts and sciences or disciplines as women, but I don't want to worry too much about that. What I'm really interested in here is the particularity of the depiction that he's giving here. But before we think about that, let's think about what it actually means to say that philosophy would be personified. Now, personification is when you take something that we don't normally think of in personal terms, and you attribute to it aspects or dimensions that belong to a person. You make it personal. What is it that a person can actually do that an abstract concept or an inanimate object can't do? Well, there's what we call agency. And when we're talking about agency, we mean the ability to actually do things, to decide things, to determine upon one course or another. So the agency of animals is rather limited. The agency of human beings is greater than animals. But, one person may have more agency than another. A person who's in the grips of addiction and who's being ruled by that addiction really doesn't have that much agency. A person who is oppressed, who is being put into a power structure where they really can't do very much, we say that that person lacks agency. And we talk about restoring agency to a person or fostering agency as something that's empowering. And really, this notion of agency, although Boethius himself is not going to talk about that, is something that we can bring to this work and think about, because what she is trying to do, what philosophy is attempting to do in exercising her own agency and acting like a person with Boethius, is to restore to him a kind of agency that's been lost through the oppression of circumstances, through the prison cell that he finds himself in, through the betrayal by other people, through the vulnerability that he's feeling, and through having forgotten who he really is and what he really is. So let's think a little bit more about what it means for philosophy to be personal or to be personified. What's really striking about this work is that she appears to him having said, I've been with you your entire life. I haven't appeared in this sort of guise. You've been, raised on my nourishment that I gave to you. You have been carrying out this long tradition that people going all the way back to philosophers before Socrates have been involved in. I have been with all of them throughout this course. And, although he's not going to speak in this way, you can see here a resemblance between this figure of philosophy and Lady Wisdom in the Bible, in the Proverbs, opposed to Lady Folly, and also in the Book of Wisdom, which is in certain canons of the Bible and not in others. This notion of personification of wisdom itself, which is what philosophy is attempting to provide. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, philosophia, and philosophy is providing wisdom to this guy in the 5th and 6th century, just as she's done for over a millennium before that. So she's appearing to him, and she comes on the scene. She comes to Boethius in his misery, as he says, when he's bewailing his fate and saying, oh, things were so great before, now they've all gone to hell. I mean, I'm here in this prison, maybe they're going to kill my kids next, or my father-in-law. You know, being good doesn't seem to pay. You know, what is this universe that God lets these bad things happen to good people and lets bad people get away with having the good things? This is a common complaint. This is not one that's totally new. We see it raised in everything from, say, the book of Job to the Greek tragedies, all the way down to other works of that time, including other Christian works that Boethius himself would know. Philosophy appears to him. And what does she do? The first thing that she does is she says, who are all these other ladies here? And those are the muses. The Greeks depicted the muses as the personifications of things like poetry or history. And he's into poetry. It's ironic because, of course, there's going to be tons of poetry running through this, but it's a certain kind of poetry. It's not entertainment poetry, which is, you may not think of poetry as being very entertaining these days, but if you want to think of entertainment poetry now, think of music, lyrics. We have those for entertainment, and oftentimes they don't have any special meaning outside of themselves. She is going to engage in poetry that's supposed to be meaningful, that's supposed to be revealing something to him. She chases off these other personified women and says, look, they're not going to do you any good. This is exactly the sort of thing that they feed upon. And if you think about this, if we were in similar circumstances, accused of a crime, suffering unjustly, deprived of the things that we formerly took for granted, having fallen from high down to low, under threat of death, how would we actually spend those days? Would we watch endless Netflix? Let's say we had a computer. Would we scrabble with the other prisoners for getting to get a good seat in the TV room? Would we sit in our cell with a TV and just watch and watch and watch and burn the days away? Trying to console ourselves in that way, trying to numb ourselves? Would we seek out drugs or alcohol to numb ourselves again, to not have to feel the sort of circumstances that we're in? Would we engage in imaginary hopes that don't really have any possibility of realization, engaging in fantasies so that we don't have to think about how bad our situation is? These are things that people do. Will they really produce a solution? Not much of one. As a matter of fact, the longer that goes on, the more those sorts of remedies turn out not to be remedies and actually make a person subject to other things. They make them less able to deal with their circumstances. So she's chasing off the muses of poetry because they're not really going to help Boethius. Boethius is like a guy who has a very bad time and then goes to the bar and says, make me a triple, not just a double, but a triple, because he wants to, as we say, soothe his sorrows. So we can ask of this, why is she here? And Boethius does ask her, right? He says, are you here just to hang out with me? Are you here to share my prison cell? She has grander plans for him, doesn't she? She is carrying out this entire process from book 1 all the way to book 5 of trying to, as I put here, to console him. And when we think about consoling, and we think about the consolation of philosophy, what do we really have in mind? What is it to console a person? Again, is it just to take them and make them no longer think about their situation, or to come up with, well, you need to look on the bright side. Sure, this person over here who you loved is passing away and dying perhaps a terrible death, and they're going to be lost to you forever. But, there's some good points to it. If you've got some black clothes, you'll get to wear those. This sounds very flippant, doesn't it? But that's, sort of the level of a lot of the consolations that people produce for these terrible situations. That's not going to solve anything, is it? Consolations, if they're really going to console, have to do something different. So we get to this other notion, and we see this over and over and over again throughout the work. Philosophy is there to heal Boethius. Now, what does that mean? That means that he is, in a certain way, sick or wounded. We only need healing when something that's normally okay is damaged, is in a bad condition, is diseased, needs to recover in some manner. So, how can we carry out healing? We have to know what actually needs to be healed. If we're not conscious of where we're actually damaged, where we're actually wounded, where we're actually hurt, how we're actually hurt, we can't be healed. For philosophy, this is going to happen, as she's going to say, by recalling him to something that he had previously. He's been studying philosophy, he's been in conversation with her his entire life, but now when the chips are down, when he's in a really bad situation, exactly the sort of thing that philosophy ought to be able to help him with, he's forgotten. He's not only forgotten what he's learned, he's forgotten who he is. He's forgotten what he is. And, I didn't put this on the board, but one of the things that Boethius is going to say about what are we as human beings? We are rational, mortal animals. This is a definition that was used by a number of people in ancient times, and each part of that is important. We are animals. We sense, we have bodies, we need to nourish them, we have desires. We are part of the animal kingdom, as they say. But we're rational. We're different than the other animals in that we possess the faculty of reason. That opens up for us an entire can of worms, as well as a whole panoply of possibilities. Because a rational being can actually reflect upon its situation and say, this is awful, this is terrible, I think things could be better. Cats and dogs can be unhappy with their circumstances, but cats and dogs don't make big plans for themselves that don't come to fruition and then make them feel lousy as a result. That's only possible for a rational animal. But a rational animal can also think out solutions to the problems that they find themselves in. We're mortal animals. That means that we're subject to death. And that's what he's facing here. In this prison cell, he's being held there. He could be pardoned, but most likely, somewhere down the line, he's going to die. And he's going to die in an unfair manner for a crime that he didn't commit, imposed by, testimony coming from people who are self-interested, imposed by an arbitrary ruler, not by any sort of judicial process. This is unfair. And yet he has to deal with it. The question is, can philosophy, when we get into these sorts of personal circumstances, can philosophy actually provide us with consolation? It can, but only if we recall what our nature actually is. If we think that we're going to live forever in the body, or that the world somehow owes us fairness, we're going to be pretty unhappy. And perhaps the remedy for that is to look at things in a philosophical way. So that's why she's there. She tells Boethius that he has learned all these things that she is going to reveal to him progressively at one point or another, but he's forgotten them. And how much can we say about the great life lessons that we ourselves have learned at one point or another, and when we reflect upon it, when we're not in a dangerous situation, when we're not feeling upset, we say, oh yeah, it was a great learning experience. I'm not going to do that next time. And then when we get into the narrow passages, when we get into the constraints of what we can call here misery, suddenly that goes out the door. This is where it gets really personal. This is a very interesting idea. There's an interplay here between the personal and the universal, we often want to contrast these to each other. We want to say, well, there's the abstract, the universal, and then there's me. There's the individual. There's the concrete human subject. And all of your stuff might be great in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. And then we often differentiate this with, well, you got your book smarts, and then you got your street smarts, or common sense, or whatever. And if philosophy really means anything, philosophy not only has to be universal, it has to be able to describe the human condition, it has to be able to describe what's better, what's worse, how we ought to behave, how we should think about the universe, how we should understand ourselves, how we should understand anything that's transcendent to us. But it also should be just as intensely personal. It ought to be able to inform our human condition, my human condition as Greg Sadler, your human condition as whoever you are, Boethius' human condition as that poor guy stuck in that cell after having had an illustrious career and now about to be killed. So philosophy is saying you've forgotten some key lessons about things that are universal, that have to do with us all, but now are being applied in a very personal way. You've forgotten these things. How are you going to remember them? How does she deal with this? Does she say, here's what I want you to do. I've got a book for you to read. Maybe just read the first, introduction and the first 3 chapters. Don't worry about the rest of it, because that's what contains the part that you need. Of course not. She doesn't do that sort of thing, because in a certain way that's kind of external. It's got to be personal. It's got to be part of who one is. Does she say, just shut up, sit back, I'm going to give you all the answers? That's not the way philosophy works either. Philosophy expects us to put forth some effort, to engage in dialogue with her, to rise to the level of the things that we're trying to understand instead of just demanding that they come down to our level. And that may require us to do some growing, some climbing, some ladder making in order to do that. So that's one issue. He's forgotten things that he should actually remember. There's another problem too. He's an emotional wreck. Doesn't use that word in the translation that you've got there, but we could in fact translate quite a few of the passages with philosophy saying, wow, you are a hot mess, Boethius. What is going on with you? All these feelings that you're feeling. And there, again, nothing wrong with feelings, but sometimes our feelings can blind us to the way things really are. If you think about the feelings that get mentioned in this text, and we'll look at each one of these in turn, they not only can reveal the world to us, they can not only be responses to the world or to events, sometimes even the right responses, they can also blind us to an awful lot, can't they? They have a tendency to make us close in upon ourselves and upon our perspective and upon how we feel, and to ignore other things. Sadness. Why is Boethius sad? It makes perfect sense for him to be sad. He's in a prison cell. He was one of the, top administrators. He was respected. He was a great scholar. He had it all together. He's one, very few people are able to manage several different careers at the same time. This guy was doing it. And he had a wonderful family. This is almost like, something that you'd see in the Lifetime or the Hallmark Channel, isn't it? This guy has got it all together, and then something comes along and takes it all away. All those wonderful gifts of chance, of fortune, he's deprived of them. Of course he feels sad. Even a regular person who doesn't enjoy all those sorts of things, put them in a prison cell, accuse them unjustly, they're going to be sad. That's a normal human reaction. Fear. Of course he's afraid. And that makes perfect sense as well. He's been accused of a capital crime. The king himself ordered him put in prison. There really is no appeal here. Anger. Why is he angry? because he's been unjustly accused, and not only has he been unjustly accused, all sorts of other people are too. And he's looking at the world as he sees it and saying, this is a screwed up place. What is going on here? I thought God cared about the world. Why does he let bad people get away with doing bad things to good people and let the bad people take the good things from the good people and give bad things to them instead? Why are things so disordered? Anger is a response to that. Anguish. Anguish is this deep pain within one's very being. A reaction to how messed up things seem to be, how hopeless things seem to be. He's really in despair when philosophy comes to him. And because he's feeling these emotions so strongly, that reinforces this forgetfulness. Because even if he does start to remember these things, you know what it's like when you have very strong emotions and then you have reasonings over here on the other side. The emotions are like loud music that drowns out the voice over here, or like the roaring of a storm or the sea, and you can't hear what's actually being said here, even though this is what's most real, this is what's most valuable. The one drowns out the other. And so she's going to have to deal with these things. She's going to have to remind him of what he's missing, and she's also going to have to do something to quell these passions, to lessen these emotions that he's feeling. You know, he's experiencing doubts. His worldview has fallen apart. It's no longer something that he can rely upon as he has been in the past. Things literally don't make sense anymore. They seem absurd to him, and he is being, affected by this as a result. These three things are all reinforcing each other. So what is the remedy for that sort of thing? Again, can you give somebody a pill that will make them deal with this better, the way that we give people antidepressants, or we give them, Ritalin to help them deal with problems concentrating? That won't get anyone through this sort of thing. Can you just get them a Hallmark card with a nice pithy saying, things aren't so bad? Could you put maybe a motivational poster with a kitten hanging on a tree branch or something like that? Those sorts of things are so superficial, they cannot actually help us when we're in these kind of situations, when the world has fallen apart, when values no longer seem to cohere. This is a real serious, personal, existential condition that Boethius finds himself in. What's most interesting about this, she talks about progressive remedies. She says, well, first I'm going to have to deal with this, then I'm going to have to deal with this. I'm going to give you the light remedies first, then I'm going to give you the stronger remedies after you're ready for them. She's like a physician who's got an entire treatment plan in mind and is applying it to this guy, Boethius. What are her remedies? Some of them are explanations. I should also put here sort of question and answer, because she's doing that with him as well. Reminders. All of these sorts of things. Don't you remember that this is the case? Don't you see that this is connected with this, and this leads to this? She even brings in some allies. She says if Dame Fortune, Lady Fortune, could show up, she's personifying something herself. She's introducing her own, let's make Fortune into a person. If she could show up, here's what she would say to you, which is producing a dialogue within a dialogue. It's like she's a composer doing that. But the key thing that she's doing is introducing arguments. And when we talk about arguments in philosophy, of course, we don't mean just yelling at each other. We mean connected reasonings that are taking place. This is using the best part of ourselves, the rational part, in order to make sense of things, in order to say, here's how we should understand things. She's also making distinctions. She is engaging. She is philosophy engaging in philosophy, doing what philosophy does in order to enlighten him about certain key topics. And these are key topics for the human person. I know I'm obscuring things a little bit drawing here, but I really want to stress this, that these key topics, these big picture items, does God exist? Is the universe screwed? Why do bad people get away with things? Is there a plan to things? What am I? These sorts of big questions are both universal and intensely personal. And being able to develop a proper understanding of those is what is going to allow Boethius to not only develop a proper viewpoint on things in an intellectual way, but to feel all right, to feel happy, to enjoy the good that he has been deprived of, to actually reconnect him with himself. So philosophy is not only personified, but shows us that philosophy as a discipline, as an activity, is intensely personal. She's showing it to Boethius, who's then showing it to us. And we're being involved ourselves in this conversation.